Welcome to Groups This Week. As a church, we exist to help all people become fully devoted followers of Jesus. We believe doing life together is a crucial part of that journey. During this time, we're going to unpack and dig deeper into the sermon we heard this past week. Let's dive in as we continue to grow in our faith, knowledge, and love of Jesus together. Hey, just a quick note. We've actually recorded all 4 of our topics for the Air We Breathe ahead of time. And so because each of the campuses are going to be working through each of the topics at a different point in time, you can select the appropriate video for your campus. So you can go to our YouTube channel to find them, or if you're on the CA webpage right now watching this video, you can click the link right below this video that says watch past video group guides to find the appropriate topic. Hey, community groups, welcome to group discussion. This past week, we were looking at the topic of humility in our series, The Air We Breathe. And so, David, this is another huge topic. And I think before we actually get talking to one another, we want to ask you, who is the most humble person you've ever met, and what made them so humble or attractive? And so why don't you hit pause and just discuss that among yourselves for a moment. So David, why do we like humble people?
Yeah, everybody loves a humble person, right? I was thinking about the question that you had asked earlier about who is, the most humble person. And I think of a number of people that I've known over the years. I think of, Pastor Mark. I mean, he was just a very humble person. And, even though he was the lead pastor, he'd always defer to others. And there's characteristics in humble people that were just like, man, that's great stuff, because they don't push themselves to the front of the line. They don't lord themselves over others. And we just think, that's awesome. But here's the thing. That idea of humility, that virtue of humility, hasn't always been around. In fact, in the Greco-Roman world, to be humble was to be seen as weak. It was to bring shame upon yourself. I mean, you would be humble maybe if the emperor walked by. It's like, okay, you're the emperor, I'm not. But the idea of humility, of considering others better than yourself, or considering others and the needs of others rather than putting your own needs up front first, like those sorts of things, disadvantaging yourself to the advantage of another. This was never a virtue. Not in the Roman world.
It was honor shame, right?
It was honor shame, and to be humble was to be shamed, and it was to put yourself in a bad light towards other people. So then you have to ask the question: okay, well, when did this whole idea of humility become a good thing, a positive thing? Well, it just so happens that it kind of came on the scene about 2,000 years ago.
And what happened there?
Yeah, well, exactly. Now, there's a really interesting piece of graffiti that exists in the 2nd century, so in the late 100s, and it's fascinating. So it's graffiti on the wall, and in this piece of graffiti, and I show this often when I'm teaching on this subject, but there's this picture. And it's a person on the cross with a donkey head.
I've seen this.
Yeah, you've seen it. And underneath it, in this scrawl, it says, Alexamenos worships his God. And it was to mock this newly emerging group called Christians. And it's like, look at these guys. They worship their God. They worship their God who's, an ass dying on a Roman cross. I mean, what kind of movement is this? Oh, but for Christians, the event of Jesus Christ and his life, death, and resurrection turns the entire world upside down. Man. And what's revealed on the cross is God's power and his wisdom. But what does Paul say? God, it's foolishness to the Greeks and weakness to the Jews. Yeah. But what looks like weakness, what looks like foolishness, is actually the power of God. And so what happens on the cross is the whole world gets turned upside down. And what you see is that the very nature of God, the creator of all things, the very character of God is he is the one who disadvantages himself to the advantage of others. And all of a sudden, this picture of humility as a virtue, as a way of living in a way that reflects the very character of God comes on the scene.
Wow.
And since then, humility has been seen as a virtue.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, just thinking Jesus' words, like he came not to be served, but to serve. give his life
Exactly.
as a ransom
Yeah,
for
very
many.
good. Yeah.
And I know John Dixon, like he's an Australian pastor. He writes like kind of extensively on this.
The
very
book,
idea,
the
right?
book is called Humilitas.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
On just like how humility came to be seen as a virtue
Yeah.
when previously it wasn't.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, David, then like practically speaking, how do we actually become humble people? So
Yeah.
it's one thing to like know that like this is like a virtue that we want to pursue, but like it's difficult to become humble. So like what steps can we take? What does it look like to
Yeah.
pursue humility? That's one of our staff values. Yeah, tell us.
All right, don't tell Sam, but I always wondered about pursuing humility. No, I mean,
Pursue Jesus?
well, exactly, because humility is a byproduct. It's always a byproduct. You try to be humble, you can't. You try to be humble to be like, hey, I'm doing a pretty good job. I'm actually doing better job than most people in being humble. I mean, you're dead the moment you say that. So as we fix our eyes on Jesus and we attend to him and following his ways, one of the byproducts is humility. And so C.S. Lewis once says, he goes, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but just thinking of yourself less.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way forward. If we want to grow in humility, we don't even think about trying to grow in humility, but we do start thinking about others rather than ourselves. And that's captured in, brilliantly in Philippians 2.
Yeah.
And Paul talks about Jesus, who, though in very nature God, did not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but instead he emptied himself, right, becoming the form of a human. But this picture that Paul lays out is to illustrate how we are to be to one another. Like, it's interesting, that passage in Philippians, that great hymn of Jesus, is actually used as an illustration by Paul to say, hey, this is how you need to treat one another.
Okay.
Let him be your model. Yeah.
So then what about passages where it says like, humble yourselves, and I think that's like 1 Peter. Is there such a thing as like adopting certain habits of the humble?
Yeah, well, Richard Foster talks about humility, and he says, what is humility? He says humility is appropriate smallness. And I like that. It's just,
countercultural.
Yeah, I'm just, you're not a doormat that people can walk on. That's not what humility is, but it's just recognize that God is God and you're not. And I think if you live that out, you're on your way. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, any parting words you'd maybe leave it for us, David?
Oh, well, hey, I think this is, again, the whole theme of the air we breathe is things that we think are self-evident are not that self-evident, but are actually shaped by this Christian revolution that took place 2,000 years ago. Yeah. And so a lot of the things we take for granted, such as humility, it's because of Jesus.
Yeah.
And everything changes. So yeah, just hold on to that, especially as you're talking to your neighbors and different things. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, David, for teaching us a little bit about humility and how that came to be seen as a virtue.
I'm probably the best person on humility you think about. Yeah.
Actually, good book recommendation. Not only Humilitas by John Dixon, but Gavin Ortland just wrote a small book called Humility. So check it out.
Cool.
It's a good one. We hope you enjoyed the teaching today. If you're wanting to follow along with our community group's discussion guide with your group, you can head to cachurch.ca/media, where you can find the discussion guide. Not only are there questions there related to the sermon, but there's also prayer prompts that relate to the passage or the topic that we were talking about, and practices that you can, on an individual level or a group level, begin integrating into your life to not only bring this knowledge into your mind, but to begin living it out.